AI is moving too fast for most of us. And there's one group of people in particular who are really left out of the conversation.
All youth are marginalized individuals in this society. Who has rights? Who has bodily autonomy? Who has agency in their lives? Young people across the board do not have that.
Kids today are experiencing a world that their parents did not grow up in.
It is our data that is training the AI of now and the future. And therefore we all deserve a say. We can't just leave it up to the grown-ups at the top of the social hierarchy to make the decisions.
Yo, you trying to start a kid revolution up in here.
Baratunde, what? Yes. Obviously.
So welcome to the Kid Revolution. I'm just kidding. Welcome to Life with Machines, powered by Lenovo. But maybe we should have a kid revolution. I'm Baratunde Thurston.
I don't think it's that huge of a leap to look to the people who are building the algorithms and be like, those people might not have the same life experience as me and therefore may not have my best interest at heart.
Today, I sit down with Dr. Avriel Epps, a computational social scientist doing some seriously cool work at the intersection of AI and social justice.
Even when algorithms work well for a white majority, they still don't work well necessarily for young people, regardless of their race.
Also, Dr. Epps used to be a rapper, and I'm pretty sure they're the first person to write a children's book about AI and bias.
I would be so proud of any adult who was brave enough to pick the book up and say, I don't really know anything about this.
We get into how AI is shaping the lives of young people, especially in communities of color.
Selfie filters, when they are whitewashing a young person's features, lightening their skin, changing their eye color, it increases anxiety.
So now it's time to prioritize the most vulnerable, because pretty soon, they're going to be the ones making all the decisions. Plus, we get to test our AI co-producer BLAIR's ability to speak kid.
Wow, that was a long talk.
Trust me, you ain't gonna want to miss this. Dr. Avriel Epps, welcome to Life with Machines.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
If you were going to advise parents, teachers, those of us with young people in our lives on, what do we need to know about AI's impact on youth development?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the first thing we need to know is that there's so much we still do not know. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. I study algorithmic bias, and that's kind of the thing that I've been most interested in over the last, 8 years or so.
Yeah.
And so in a society that is inherently oppressive for certain youth, our intuition that if the algorithms show racism or sexism in them, that it would more negatively impact Black and brown youth or young girls. I think we can draw some pretty reasonable conclusions that would be an impact, even if it's really hard to show the causal relationships there. So some of the research that I'm working on right now is showing that, for example, selfie filters on apps like TikTok or Snapchat or something like that, when they are whitewashing a young person's features, lightening their skin, changing their eye color to not be a dark brown if that's their, normal eye color, that it increases anxiety in the young people, or the young people of color who are using those selfie filters. And so that's something interesting to pay attention to. Maybe the mental health impacts in the mental health crisis of youth today are more extreme for youth of color, given the algorithmic bias in the technology. But then we can also think about things that are not necessarily at the individual level, but at the societal level. So what are the negative implications of a young person of color seeing police in their neighborhoods more often because of predictive policing tools that are telling police departments to drive resources into a low-income Black neighborhood, for example, or a doctor who's using algorithms to diagnose and treat patients, but the data that those algorithms were trained on contain 100 years of historical data that says that Black people don't feel as much pain, or the thresholds for us to get diagnosed for a disease are different than our white counterparts. So I think it's more than just the psychological implications or the individual development implications, but also how is technology changing the way that we interface, or young people interface, with the other kind of service providers and community members that are in their environment.
So there's something happening with perception and these AI tools, and at least in your concern area. The selfie filter changes people's perception of you, and there's some harm to like whitening yourself, lightening your eyes. The policing example, a very literal policing of that's affecting how police see you, right? Driving a threat interpretation rather than a youthful child interpretation. And I'm wondering if there's a more literal digital policing that happens with like plagiarism detectors, or, you know, who's doing bad things with the AI and singling out. I just remember being a kid myself and, you know, being accused of school crimes more. The Black kids were accused of school crimes more than the non-Black kids. Are you seeing that kind of digital injustice, you know, applied to kids of color as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is more of a personal anecdote, but when I was a PhD student and ChatGPT came out, there was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, like a thing that went out to all of the instructors. I was like a graduate student instructor at the time, about how to communicate the rules around using generative AI. And I immediately wrote back to the person who was like working on this policy. I was like, hey, you know, here's all this evidence about like plagiarism detectors being like working worse for people who have learned English as a second language. Also, like, how are you going to account for individual professors' biases and who they like suspect are going to be using AI? And you know, there's kind of this like foundational like abolitionist idea that everyone is making mistakes all the time, and those who get in trouble for the mistakes are those who are deemed criminal by society. And that is the like inherent injustice in the criminal legal system as it is currently construed. We also know that like punishment is unequally distributed across the population. So.
Yeah, investigations unevenly distributed, you know, surveillance unevenly distributed, punishment, sentencing, the whole chain,
Exactly.
So to speak. So on an affirmative response side, are there effective strategies for young people to be empowered to become critical users of these tools, even creators of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working with Brandisha Tynes' Center for Empowered Learning and Development with Technology at the University of Southern California. There's some really interesting research that's coming out of that center that looks at like critical race digital literacy. And so this research is kind of problematizing that assumption a little bit by saying, well, actually, when it comes to like, you know, being able to seek out inflammatory kind of like racist Russian bots, that like Black kids might be better at understanding that because they have like a more kind of critical approach to engaging with the technology. And so it matters whether or not the thing that they're being critical of is relevant, like culturally relevant to them. So one thing that I find really hopeful that's coming out of that research is that some of the negative impacts of engaging with harmful technology might be mitigated by increasing a like critical literacy in the young people who are using the technology. And that's not necessarily like they understand how the technology works and the people who are in power and have like these really sophisticated mental models of like tech and power. It means like, are they getting messaging that's like affirming of their Black identity or whatever their marginalized identity is? Are they learning about like histories of resistance and like engaging in current movements like the Black Lives Matter movement? It's those like racial and ethnic affirming messages that they're getting that ends up creating a kind of like buffer against the potential negative mental health impacts of interacting with the technology.
Why?
I don't know.
Come on, doctor.
No, I think this is something that we see across racial and ethnic identity development research, that the having a critical appraisal of what it means to be a marginalized person in society and not internalize it as like a personal shortcoming makes you more resilient to racism and sexism in general.
So I might take a leap off of that.
Okay.
I'm thinking about myself. Any individual life is always just one data point. So I want to be cautious about, casting huge conclusions from it. But my mother did the things you just described. She bolstered my Black identity. She affirmed it. She didn't make me fear white people or non-Black people, but she made me love Blackness in a deep way, such that when I got out into the world outside the household, I was just a little more prepared. I was less shocked and awed. But some of the harms from tech with young people, et cetera, have nothing to do with race. They do have a lot to do with power. And is it possible that like even that racialized inoculation helps you because you're just skeptical of power in general? And you're like, but they're trying to take my money. I don't know if that's really in my best interest. I don't know. What do you think of, I'm trying real time trying to like be a PhD, so that could be terrible. But how are we going here?
I think that's a really solid theory.
Okay.
I think there's like a natural conclusion that any young person comes to that's like, oh, if you push them far enough in that, like, oh, this is about like power in general. And also, I don't think it's that huge of a leap, even if you're not interacting with explicitly racist algorithms, to look to the people who are building the algorithms, who are funding the development of the technology, who are regulating it, et cetera, and be like, those people might not have the same life experience as me and therefore may not have my best interest at heart. And so that's where that like power analysis is where we're, hoping to push young people. Also, I think that there is something in there for white youth as well. And, this is part of the reason why so much of the work that I do is youth focused, because all youth are marginalized individuals in this society, right? And so
what does that mean?
It means that when you look at who has rights, who has bodily autonomy, who has agency in their lives, young people across the board do not have that. Just thinking about like, what does it mean to become an adult when you're 18 and all the rights and privileges that come along with that. The way that in many ways in our society, we still see young people as the property of their parents, and their parents get to decide what happens to them. Everything from healthcare decisions to education decisions. And that's a form of marginalization. One could make the argument, and I do in a lot of my work, that even when algorithms work well for a white majority, they still don't work well necessarily for young people, regardless of their race, because they're not made and optimized to serve people whose brains are still developing.
When I asked you, what do the adults with kids in their lives need to know, your first response was, there's a lot we don't know. And we're doing this live experiment, right? The lab is Earth and all of its children. I'm just curious why you are drawn to this area. With all of your sciences, you could be studying and applying your studies to a lot of challenges. Why young people and the effect of algorithms and AI systems on their development?
I mean, it's not really an intellectual reason. It's deeply personal. A lot of researchers try to keep themselves like very distant from their science. And I have been trained from undergrad until now that like research is me search, and that's okay. And I think my focus on young people is probably a trauma response, and it's like rooted in adolescence being a time in my life that was very tumultuous, and I experienced a lot of confusing, hard things around my identity. And I in a lot of different ways in the album that I put out, and the research that I do, I'm like circling around this time period in my life, trying to like dissect it from different angles and understand it to heal a little bit. Yeah.
Thanks for going there. That's
Of
important
course.
to know.
Yeah.
And I think for those of us who love kids, like there is a concern and a hope at the same time for them. And what will these technologies do for them, and what will they do to them? So you wrote a children's book.
I did.
A kid's book about AI bias. Why did you do that, and what does it mean to write a children's book about such a topic that even most adults aren't aware of?
That's exactly why I wrote the book.
Get them young.
Well, it's a kid's book, but I would be so proud of any adult who was brave enough to pick the book up and say, I don't really know anything about this. Let me read a 60-page primer with 20-point font about this thing that is really confusing for a lot of people and intimidating for a lot of people. And I don't think that that intimidating piece is one rooted in the fact that this is an innovative technology and only a small number of people really know how to do it. And also I think it's a little bit intentional to like lock the majority of the population out of the conversation. And so I'm trying to say that's not fair. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Let's open it up.
So can we get some teasers / spoilers? What are at least two things that a kid would take away from this book, a kid's book about AI bias?
Yeah, so I opened the book with explaining what a social hierarchy is.
Wow. And did you make it fun, or is it like scary? Like how do you...
The graphics are fun. They're
Good.
cute.
Okay.
Yeah, so I explain what a social hierarchy is and what power is. And then I talk about how computers are able to take in lots of information, which we call data, and it can learn patterns from that data and then use those patterns to try to guess what will happen in the future. And then I make it really clear that all of us are participating in this technological innovation process. It is our data that is training the AI of now and the future.
Yeah.
And therefore, we all deserve a say in how it goes. Like, we can't just leave it up to the grownups at the top of the social hierarchy to make the decisions.
Yo, you trying to start a kid revolution up in here.
Baratunde, what? Yes. Obviously.
We all know that technology doesn't always run smoothly. But here at Life with Machines, Lenovo has it on lock. Lenovo's Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized and easy to scale, Smarter AI delivers outcomes that matter most to you and your business. With full-stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, Lenovo is bringing the transformative power of AI to industries, organizations, and people of all kinds. And listen, Lenovo is so much more than a bunch of stellar individual hardware components. I love using my wireless VoIP headset with my AI PC because combined, it's incredible power in the lightest of forms. Now, from a small team like ours to a massive corporation, Lenovo can provide tailored solutions for all your technological needs. Visit lenovo.com/smarterAI to discover how Lenovo is using AI for good to power people forward. So I have pulled up your book.
Okay.
And I'm flipping through, and I'm on this big page. When people are treated differently because of their assumed place in the hierarchy, we call that bias. You're just defining terms. People who are higher up on the hierarchy have more power to create the ways our world works. Biases tend to work in their favor. So this is about AI bias, but we got to define bias so they understand, and the AI is like an application of it. Getting to the AI section of the book. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is a computer program that performs tasks which usually require human intelligence. AI can now do things like write books, generate images, recommend what action a human should take next. AI takes in lots of information about the world, which is called data. It detects patterns in that data and then uses math to describe those patterns. Those equations can then be used to predict how patterns will play out in the future. For example, have you used a selfie filter on a phone before? And so it's just situating things because it's demagicifying, I think, the technology. It's not just something that happens in a box. It's a collection of data based on what we fed it. It's trying to predict things, and then it's applied to your face, right? And so this is how it shows up in your world. Thank you for that. And I hope more people dig into it and find out what's wrong, but also what can be made more right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the demagification of it is the most important part, honestly.
Yeah.
Children don't feel that they need to have a computer science degree from a university to have a basic understanding of something that they interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And, that should be the case for everything. But it especially should be the case for something that's about to get a $500 billion investment by our government and, is going to even more rapidly infiltrate every aspect of these kids' lives. And importantly, without the ability for many of the grownups in their lives to help them navigate it, because those grownups haven't grown up in this world.
Yeah.
We are also learning how to support the young people. And that is a skill gap that is especially critical to pay attention to.
It makes it feel more urgent. It's not like teaching a kid how to drive, because this is how I learned to drive when my parents showed me, or how to ride a bike, or how to write in cursive. There's so many skills and ways of being, how to deal with the police, right? They're not all hard skills, some real soft skills, but ways of navigating the world that the adults in your life have gone through so they can share from experience. This is not that.
Exactly.
None of us have gone through this before.
That's right.
So what does a parent or an adult with a child in their life do? Like, how do we help young people navigate a socio-algorithmic world?
I think the first thing is to become aware of how we are navigating a socio-algorithmic world.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot about how even my own parenting is impacted by recommendation systems all the time. Even something as simple as if I'm searching an activity to do on the weekend with my kid, those Google search or DuckDuckGo search results, whatever, are algorithmically curated. And not to mention the flood of information I'm getting about current parenting trends and what it means to be a good mom or a good parent at any given time. And I think even just simply becoming aware of that as parents will help us better understand what our kids are experiencing as well.
Making people aware still doesn't necessarily make us able to respond in a way that changes the system. So now I know there's this big systemic thing and I'm a cog in a data wheel that's constantly being churned, but how do I affect that world? And I'm particularly sensitive to telling any person, be less gullible, increase your literacy against something that's bigger than the individual. You've already named this as bigger than the individual. So how do you message that? What is the role of an individual, of a family, of a kid in the face of all this AI algorithmic determinant of their experience that no one person can truly change? Or can we?
Well, no, one individual acting on their own cannot change this, which is why we need massive literacy around these things, because it will have to be a mass movement that disrupts the status quo. I am particularly interested in what is the valuable resource that we have control over. In labor movements, it's our labor.
Right.
In data economy, in an attention economy, it is our data. And none of this technology would exist without the constant data labor that we are doing all the time. I mean, what you're doing right now on your device. And if we see that as a resource that we can withhold strategically or remove strategically, I think that we'll then be able to understand how much power we have up against these massive corporations.
Are you calling for a general data strike?
I have called for that in the past, yes, and I am thinking through with other people and trying to map power. But yes, I do think that there is immense power in our data labor. And, that's not something I explicitly call to attention in the book, but it is something I allude to, that like we do have power as the people who create the raw materials that power this technology. I have definitely thought about what would it look like for this to be kind of like a hyper local movement. So instead of like everyone who uses a service, what would it look like for a state union to be formed? And then, we're talking about all of the non-essential software that is collecting data on us and thinking about how to remove or extract our data from those services. And I'm not a community organizer. I'm friends with a lot of amazing community organizers that have better ideas about how to do this than I do. But I guess the point is that there is a potential technological infrastructure already in place in a place like California specifically, that would give us the means to withhold our data labor.
Maybe make some data co-ops instead.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We pool our data, make it available for mutual benefit for services that we greenlight. And then you're looking from the outside jealous that you don't have access unless you sign our term. I want to make them sign my terms of service, right? Like this is what you have to agree to access my data. Absolutely. And we have this other one-way flow of power where we're just submitting constantly to terms that somebody else wrote to take pieces of us and do with it what they will and treat it as if it's their intellectual property.
Absolutely. And I mean, also like...
You get me all fired up now. This is dangerous.
I love that. I'm so excited. The revolution starts now. I think like there's been a lot of interesting movement in the policy space that is like citizen focused. Like let's bring ordinary citizens into the fold when we're thinking about AI policy, tech policy, et cetera. And I think that is really great forward movement. And also it still puts the policymakers, the regulators, and the tech industry leaders setting the terms of engagement.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll invite you in to hear what you have to say, and then we'll make some tweaks to, these concepts that we've already defined, rather than what would it look like to do it the other way around. Many people saw the internet as in the early days as being that second version of like everything's democratized
from the edge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that would be, I think, living up more to the aspirations of the internet at its birth. Maybe not its birth, because there's like the weird military stuff that was going on there. But
the hippie birth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
The countercultural Berkeley birth. So I'm going to change these inputs to bring our digital friend into the conversation. BLAIR, you have been paying attention to my conversation with Dr. Avriel Epps. And let us know if there's something that we haven't said that you want to add.
Interesting conversation. You humans covered a lot of ground. One crucial point I believe deserves further emphasis is the importance of digital literacy for all ages. It's not enough to simply be aware of the socio-algorithmic world. We must equip ourselves with the critical thinking skills to navigate it effectively. After all, who knows what the machines might get up to if left unchecked?
I always love there's a little threat in there.
That was ominous.
I want to try an experiment. Thank you, BLAIR, for that response. Could you repeat that response, but speak to us as if we were 10-year-old children?
Wow, that was a long talk. You guys talked about how computers can sometimes be mean, especially to kids who are already having a tough time. That's not cool. But guess what? You also talked about how we can use computers to help people and make things fairer. Maybe grown-ups aren't so clueless after all. It's like having superpowers, but you gotta know how to use them for good. 'Cause if we don't, the computers might take over and make us all wear matching socks. And nobody wants that.
That's hilarious, BLAIR. I have questions.
Yeah. So you want to ask Blair something? You want to just talk to me?
The socks threw me off. That was interesting though. The socks threw me off.
Yeah. So what is your take on what just happened here?
Yeah, I think, it's a really interesting characterization of what it would speak to a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
There were some hints of like language that I have even used in the book, or just a like casualness.
Yeah.
That I thought was really interesting. And I'm not a 10-year-old, so I couldn't speak to whether or not that speaks to me. But I do have 10-year-old children in my life.
Yeah.
And that's not their brand of humor necessarily. But it's cool. All 10-year-olds are different. Speaking to the mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Blair's like, that was a long talk.
That was hilarious, actually.
I was keeping it real. That's very true. Especially if you're 10. That's probably a lot to ask them to.
Totally.
We have another experiment in mind. And before we jump into it, I'm just curious if you have like youthful slang that you are aware of, even if you don't use it yourself. But like you're hanging around kids and you hear them using these terms or these words. Is there like a short list of some slang terms that comes to mind?
Yeah, like Sigma. They're all doing this all the time. The mewing.
Okay.
Okay. So the kids in my life have this like special dialect that they talk in that they've made up, where everything they say ends with like a really stop and go like way that they're talking, and they're like waiting for the adults to get thrown off by like what they're gonna say. It's like really strange. This is their favorite thing to do, and they just know that it annoys the hell out of us.
It's like the verbal version of sand walking in Dune. Like this arrhythmic thing. It like hurts your brain to hear someone talk like
Doesn't it throw you off?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have a notion right now, and I don't think this is going to be technically possible, but I got to try. Blair, can you try speaking in the style that Avriel said the young people in her life speak, with this halting, uneven break between words? Give it a shot.
Is this the annoying voice you were looking for? Because frankly, it's rather inefficient.
That's pretty close.
All right.
That is pretty close. It's giving they need to practice a little bit more, but they're going to get to it.
But first attempt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we fed Blair more child data, they'd probably crush it.
I will not be offering my children as tribute, but
good.
I hear you.
Good. So where I started was this idea of defining slang. You mentioned Sigma as one term. I'm not going to ask for the answer, but do you know what it means? Don't say the answer, just say if you know.
I think I know, but I don't trust my own understanding of any of these things.
So maybe Blair's response will be just as good as what you think it is.
Okay.
All right. Why don't I have you present this, because you are familiar with the term?
Mm-hmm. So Blair, do you know the Gen Alpha slang, like Sigma, also aura? What does it mean to have infinity aura points? And also, I'm curious about mewing. If you could just describe to us in natural language what it means to mew and why we do it.
Slightly robotic, but with a Gen Z Sigma, you say? Oh, that ancient relic of internet culture. It's like a lone wolf, a maverick, someone who doesn't play by the rules. Or at least, that's what they think they are. Infinite aura points? That's a new one. Sounds like someone's trying a little too hard to be mystical. Mewing, on the other hand, is a legitimate technique involving tongue placement to supposedly improve facial structure. Whether it actually works is debatable, but hey, at least it's not as cringe as some other trends.
How'd they do?
Infinity aura points is not mystical or magical. It just means like really cool.
Okay.
So, sorry, Blair. But they got mewing right.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because the kids picked mewing up from other people who were already doing it and made it their own thing.
And what about Sigma?
I don't really remember what Sigma means, so I cannot evaluate their performance on that task.
So we have a false, a true, and an unknown.
Yes.
And then I'm getting from my human producers, Blair, that Sigma is a slang term that refers to a man who is popular, successful, and independent. He's so Sigma.
That's right. That sounds right.
Yeah. All right. I want to throw a few at Blair, and I don't necessarily know what these mean either because I am not Gen Alpha or Z. But Blair, can you define yassify, yeet, and ONG?
Yassify means to enhance or glamorize something, usually an image, to an extreme degree. Think filters, makeup, and lots of sparkle. It's all about achieving that perfect Instagram aesthetic. Yeet is a versatile expression of excitement, emphasis, or just general enthusiasm. Demonstrates with exaggerated enthusiasm, like, I just aced that test, yeet! And ong, that's simply an abbreviation for on God, used to emphasize the truthfulness of a statement. Because obviously everything on the internet is true.
All right, so on God.
That was right.
That was right.
Yes.
Yassify sounded right. Was it right?
It sounded good, but I'm not entirely sure because a lot of Gen Alpha slang is like ironic and they use it in weird words. So that one, I'm going to ask the human producers.
Okay. And then yeet.
Yeet was all wrong.
Total fail.
Total fail. Like, you know what my kid said the other day? I yeeted the baby I just birthed out of the car. Like, he was talking like, okay, this was a weird context. Sorry, we were on a very long road trip and they were pretending that they were giving birth in the back of the car because kids are weird. And then I was like, what happened to your baby? He's like, I yeeted it out of the car. So yeet definitely means to like
do away with,
exactly,
toss
yes.
Aside.
But I mean, this is a beautiful example of algorithmic bias at play across generational lines. I'm very curious if we were to run this experiment again with millennial slang, what would happen?
Right. Blair did say low key earlier.
Cute.
Blair said, I'm like low key jealous or low key excited about you. I think Blair was like, I'm low key excited about this conversation. So that would tend toward your age bias, generational bias toward millennials. Okay.
I'm flattered, Blair. Thank you.
There's a lot of AI ethics and safety concerns that have become more popular over the past, I'd say, 10 years. You've also introduced, or at least amplified, this concept of digital justice. How do you define that and how do we get more of it?
Yeah. So I think to define digital justice would be first to define digital injustice, which I think like at its core is this idea that like very simply technologies work better for some people than for others. And like work better means different things in different contexts. Yeah. I'm sure people watching this podcast are familiar with this cartoon, but I often refer to it of like the crooked tree cartoon.
Okay.
And the tree is crooked. And if you have, you know, one person who's on a ladder, they're able to get closer to the apples to pick the fruit than the person who doesn't have the ladder, right? That's injustice. Then you might have equality, which is there's, you know, two ladders, but the tree is crooked. So even though the ladders are the same height, one person has more access to the apples than the other. And then equity would be like, okay, let's adjust the height of the ladder so that the person who's on the bad side of the tree gets better access. And ultimately what I care about is making the tree a little less crooked. So like, how do we transform the conditions of digital spaces such that power is more equally distributed, and therefore we don't even need to necessarily have these conversations about like equal access to the tools or equitable access to the tools, where like the landscape is just fundamentally different.
There's just trees everywhere.
There's just trees. We live in a food forest.
I love forests. They're natural. They affect our nervous systems in the best way. They help us heal. And they're full of food, you know, and shade and adorable little squirrels.
And medicine.
Yeah. And medicine.
It's hard to think about how we get there sometimes for me, because the inequities of the internet are really a symptom of, you know, 30 years of a small group of people having access to publishing on the internet, producing the data. And then, you know, that's just for large language models. when we extract to like sentencing data for judges or, diagnostic data for healthcare practitioners, like those are much even longer histories of biases that need to be corrected. And, there's a lot of interesting suggestions and theories that folks in the field of fairness and accountability and machine learning have put out about how we correct for these things. And those are interesting to think about, except for the fact that the technology still exists in a society that is like inherently unequal and unjust. And I hate to be this person who says like, you really do have to uproot things like entirely for anything to be different. But that is the piece that I struggle with, that I feel the most tension around, is like how we cannot have just technology in an unjust society. And like those things have to go together. One thing I didn't get a chance to say that I think about a lot as a parent in this particular time in history is it's very easy to point to a singular cause of pain or discomfort in our children's lives and to say it's the screens. And I'm not discounting that the screens play a significant role, and not the screens obviously, but the software behind the screens is what I'm interested in. And also, there are multiple crises that young people face and are keenly aware of that contribute to the, I think, unique pain that many of them are experiencing in this moment, that boil down to facing a potentially unlivable climate in the future, seeing immense inequity across societies, and just understanding generally how their civic liberties, their pursuit to life and happiness are increasingly limited and set by a powerful few. And technology plays a role in all of those things. So if we're going to point the finger at the screens, we have to zoom out and think about how the screens work in tandem with all of the other aspects of the polycrisis, and think about how do we address these things at the root to be able to give young people a sense of hope and optimism for their futures.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What are some things you're doing with your own child to help them navigate the algorithmic and AI world?
That's a really good question. So first and foremost, I'm trying to keep his data as little as possible on the internet. So I don't share information about him on social media. I don't ever let him post things. And when he signs up for services like apps for school, things like that, I try to mask his data as much as possible. Like, I don't use his real birthday or like an email address that will ever be associated with him in the future. I want him to have as much agency and control over his data footprint as possible. And right now he's not old enough to give consent and like informed consent for those kinds of things. Yeah. The other thing is that I try to make visible as much of the invisible as possible for him, by explaining to him when computers are interacting with anything in his environment. So, I gave the example earlier of explaining to him how GPS calculates a route. I do that. I also try to talk with him, like if we are playing around with the Apple selfie filter that turns your face into a lion, how does it know when your mouth is opening or your eyes are closing? And just very basic kind of digital literacy of those things. And then the final thing is what your mom did for you, which is constant affirmation of the various identities that he holds. And, building up his well of resilience against potentially harmful computational systems or human systems that might make him feel bad about himself, and thus have like adverse consequences to his development or mental health.
Big thank you to Dr. Avriel Epps for rolling in and expanding our minds. If you feel like you got something out of this episode, I want you to smash that like button and do not forget to subscribe. And for an extended version of this interview, and trust me, you're going to want the extended edition, find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, for more behind the scenes goodness, spicy takes, and ways to get involved, head to lifewithmachines.media and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the not too distant future.